Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Film Fellas. I've just literally 30 minutes ago walked out of seeing Mission Impossible 7. Rob saw it last night, and we're going to discuss whether this is the best mission yet or not. And so let me not hog the limelight on this one. And since he saw it first, and he's going to give us our impressions of it. Rob, what did you think?
It was the best mission so far. Quite simply, that's the end of discussion. Thank you all for watching.
Do you know what? It's funny, everybody. I'm going to tell you. Let me just read out the text that Rob sent to me when he exited the cinema yesterday. I'll miss out the profanities. I'll put something in replace of the profanities. Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning. One word: wow. 2 words: effing wow. 3 words: very effing wow. And that was your thing. I'm going to go a little bit more reserved. I'm going to say it's not as good as Fallout.
Okay.
But it is certainly on a par with Ghost Protocol. And I mean, you know, my favorite mission is Mission 1. I love De Palma. I love what they did with Mission 1 and how different it is. I would say it's definitely tied for second or third with Ghost Protocol and Mission 1. But listen, look, that last 30 minutes, you know, I think the second half of the film is better than the first half of the film.
I do.
Utterly blew me away. That second half of that film is quite possibly, I would argue, the best second half of any Mission Impossible franchise apart from Fallout. So how are we going to do this, Rob? Just kind of chat over the plot and kind of what you thought. We'll try not to give a few spoilers, but since
we've got to give spoilers, it can't be discussed. Right, so I was super excited to see this. This has been the movie for the summer for me. I was much more excited about this than I was for Indiana Jones, much more excited than I was for the Fast and the Furious, even for John Wick 4, and I'm a massive John Wick fan. So I was super excited for this, and it absolutely didn't let me down. It's very, very, very good. It's so good that the only criticisms I've got are very, very minor criticisms. More nitpicking. It's more like I've got to think of some faults with it rather than they jump out at me.
I guess my major complaint about the film, right, is the whole thing of how many times are we going to have this 2 halves of the MacGuffin, and we've got to find both halves of the MacGuffin and things like that. It feels like that's been the plot of Fast and Furious. It feels like it's been the plot of quite a number of films but listen, that is like literally scraping the barrel of complaints. It's like I'm having to dig around with it. My only other complaint was in the scene where Cruise sneaks into the meeting with the heads of various kind of, I presume, government security heads.
Yeah.
And they talk about, and nobody knows what the IMF is. And it's like, well, hang on. How did we get from Mission 3, where it's got a huge infrastructure, and then Mission, 4 and 5, where they're having government oversight committees and the CIA are arguing about whether it needs to be disbanded, to now all of a sudden nobody knows what it is.
Well, yeah, you see, this is not just a fault of Mission Impossible. This is a fault of a lot of movies that have sequels. Once they get to a certain number of sequels, they start to rewrite the character history and rewrite the history of the franchise. They either do it with a total reboot, or they do it with a soft reboot. Like Bond gets a soft reboot with each new Bond actor, and some do total reboots. This had a flavour, let's say, of a soft reboot, because I picked that up. And I thought, well, in the previous Mission Impossible, Alec Baldwin says how he left the CIA as a sideways to take over the IMF, and yet nobody knows about it. And it leads to a bigger plot hole later on. Because for me, I'd always got the impression that Ethan Hunt was in the army, and then he joined the CIA, and then he got like handpicked to be in the ultra highest level of spies, very much like 007 is, you know. I also, and it's very clear in other movies, particularly in the first one, that there are teams of IMF and they work independently. And yet now we seem to have rewritten the character to be Batman. You know, when
exactly.
no one else,
it's like, yeah. When we've got some trouble, we just pick up a phone and leave a message.
Yeah.
It was like, hang on. It was like, what's going on here? And I guess the other gripe that I had, which I felt was really unnecessary, was Ethan's backstory with the villain. And it was like, it felt like this was very, you know, it was like Ethan's had a series of brunette girlfriends before who have all died, and this was probably the first one, and this guy killed her. But it felt very much what I was like, I don't care about that. It's like, it doesn't feel like it added anything to it.
Also, it again sort of seemed to rewrite his personal history, because it turns out that he was basically press ganged into the IMF. You know, he was given a prison or join the IMF choice. Well, that's not really a choice. That's a press gang.
And that's not the Ethan that was in the first one, because the first one, I got the impression that Ethan is very much a bit of a Boy Scout. He's super smart. He's very observant about what's going on. He is the perfect consummate spy. Yeah, and you can imagine that he went through the army and probably went into the CIA and then was recruited that way by Phelps. Yeah, there's a certain revisionist stuff going on, which I felt was a little bit kind of sloppy.
Yeah, it didn't need it. You know, we're 7 movies in. We don't need, like, it's very, very easy to pick fault with the Fast and the Furious for plot holes, but a secret reveal of a secret brother we didn't need, and we didn't need this change of his backstory. We don't need it. We know who Ethan is. He's a goodie. We know he's a goodie. We know he will always fight for the little guy. He puts one life ahead of the mission. Let's just get on with it. So that, and the other thing of that scene is the delivery of the message. You know, and I've always quite liked these. There's always been a little bit of a, you know, the glasses, the camera.
Yeah.
Here we've got an Uber food delivery guy.
Yeah, it's basically IMF mission delivered by, you know, Deliveroo. Yeah.
Yeah.
And also a very green operative who it was clearly his first delivery and seemed very nervous. But hang on, you're in the IMF. You've clearly gone through a journey to get there. I'm pretty sure delivering a bag to a guy in a dark room wouldn't make you as nervous and forget the things that you're supposed to ask. But listen, you know, this might sound like we're really picking holes in it, and I guess it's quite funny, isn't it? If this was a Kathleen Kennedy and Disney movie, everybody would be really coming down hard on these little kind of facts. But it's a Tom Cruise movie, and you know, hey, look, the rest of the film is really so damn good that, okay, these are just creases in an otherwise pretty damn near perfect
absolutely
movie.
And it kind of goes to show how good the whole movie is if these are the only criticisms we can make. You know, there's some movies where you just, from frame number 1, you say it's rubbish and you pick holes in it. Here, where we're reaching for things to find fault with, just because the rest of the movie is so very, very good.
And I think, you know, when we talk through let's talk through the key scenes of the film. Let's talk about the opening in the submarine, which I actually felt it felt a bit old-fashioned, and I really liked it. I felt like
did it remind you of Hunt for Red October?
Yeah, massively. Yeah. Though, it was also a little bit, I think there's a little bit of homage there to I can't remember what it's the McGowan I think, is it Ice Cold in Alex? Ice Station Zebra. I think there's a little bit of a nod in the submarine bits to a bit of Ice Station Zebra, very Cold War-esque. But yeah, massive nod to Hunt for Red October. You know, we have this entity, this kind of AI war machine that ultimately then betrays the submarine, and that kind of sets the plot in motion.
Well, maybe you took it in a different way to what I took it, because I didn't take it that it betrayed the submarine. I took it that this is where the source code is. So it killed the source code of itself. It purposefully destroyed itself so that it can't ever be rewritten. The only weakness it's got is the source code, so it buried the source code at the bottom of the Arctic Ocean.
Yeah, and that I think that's what I got from it as well. But I guess it's a little bit kind of confusing as to, did the source code know what it would become, and so they wanted everybody else outside the world to think that this entity was rubbish? You know what? Because they didn't think that. They, and mind you, it does then go into the meeting, doesn't it? I mean, there's a lot of exposition in those first scenes of the hell, and all of a sudden we find out that there's this code, and it's gone rogue, and it's tripled and quadrupled, and therefore invaded all these kind of systems and things like that. We're not ever shown the effect of it. That's almost the point of that meeting, which is, I think, again, it's very exposition heavy in that kind of first 15 minutes.
And it also it doesn't really tell you what the AI's end game is. I think it maybe it missed a trick, or it could have said, effectively we've just created Skynet. It could have had maybe a little line like that. But in every movie you can think of, the AI becomes self-aware and then kills humans. Skynet, Age of Ultron. Maybe they just wanted to not say that, but they didn't actually say what the AI was going to do. Or they didn't even say they didn't even know what the AI was going to do. It just says it's got to this point and then it's not doing anything else. And you go, okay.
And obviously, it's not until near the very end that you find out how the keys from the Submariners ended up in the hands of various kind of people. It's kind of...
I don't think you did find that out, because there's a line that says that they were found like 18 months or something in the spring. But how do you know? And this is what I couldn't work out. They must have sent divers to get the keys off the submarine, off the under the ocean, which means that they must have realized that the submariners came up from the submarine, which means they must have known the submarine was there, and also they must have taken the keys separately for one of them to be stolen by Ilsa Faust.
Yeah. So I'm giving the filmmakers a little bit of kind of almost bandwidth here, because I presume we're going to find out all this later.
Number two,
yeah. I think there's some holes there about how did those keys get from being in the icy water to Ilsa Faust in the desert. I think there's some massive holes there, which I'm going to kind of almost back off and think, right, I trust McQuarrie that he'll explain it in the next one. And then we get to the desert scene where Ethan finally hooks up with Ilsa, and there's a kind of a faking of her death.
Now, just before, I did love the horses laying down bit, and then this is really good. Again, they're little scenes that don't need to be there, but enhance the movie so much. And the desert scene is good, but it is an obvious fake out. I mean, in no way did I think she was dead. I convinced us, we've messaged each other well in advance, months ago, she was going to die. But you knew that she wasn't going to die now. And I'll tell you, one of the things that went wrong with it is she appears in too many of the clips in the trailer.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
The trailer gives away that she can't be dead. You could, if they'd have used maybe one clip, you might have thought, well, maybe that's a flashback sequence or something. But she's in too many moments for her to not die at that point.
And I guess let's talk about Ilsa for a minute as well, because she's been such a big part and a joyous part, certainly a Fallout. Really, and she's great in Rogue Nation as well. But in Ghost Protocol, but in Fallout, she's just such an integral part of the team. Here, it's very throwaway. Is Ilsa's role in this, and she doesn't. I mean, the rumor is her schedule was too busy. She couldn't kind of fit in the MI7. She had too many projects on. So, the character has been written out, and she doesn't appear in very many scenes. And even when she's in some scenes, it's literally, you could tell she was probably on set for a day.
There's some conversations, particularly in one scene where she's describing who Gabriel is. She doesn't even look like she's in the same room. the other three, the guys, are in one section where you can see them behind, and she's shot from another angle.
Yeah.
You probably want there. So
So there's definitely some scheduling kind of conflicts, isn't there, that led to that. So then we get onto this airport sequence where the plot then starts to kind of happen, don't we? We then begin the kind of, let's call it the chase, the search for the key. What do you think of the airport sequence?
Well, firstly, I think airports are always a really good spy place to have spy movies. Firstly, there's a thing that whenever I go to an airport, I always, I feel like a spy, and you've got your passport, and there's lots of international people going on, and it's a wonderful setting. It also explains, without having to explain, why people don't have guns, because nobody has a gun at an airport. So that's a really, you know a lot about the setting just by saying it's an airport. So I thought that was very good. Also, there's lots of there's some very good use of humor, particularly with the masks.
And that.
And again, there's a bit in the movie Casino Royale, the Daniel Craig bit, where it's set in the airport. Then all of a sudden he goes, "I think there's a bomb," and you go, "Well, where? There's no clue that there's a bomb, except you just assume bomb with an airport." And there's a little bit of that here, where there's a suspicious bag. And then when Benji says, "I think there's a bomb," you go with it because you kind of think bombs are going to be at airports. It's one of those high risk sort of, it's okay, not okay to have a bomb there, but it's okay for a story to just put a bomb at an airport. So you don't need to give much more explanation than that. So I loved this whole scene.
And I think that's where Benji obviously twigs on quite early on that the entity is manipulating things and making things disappear in the digital kind of world. As well, and Benji doing his, let's call it the Die Hard 2 baggage kind of like search kind of moment. It's not as violent as the Die Hard one or action packed, but it's good. It's like, I like the whole riddle thing. I thought the riddles were stupidly easy. It was like, pretty sure Benji would solve them by himself. He wouldn't need the help, but. Listen, look, you want to go with it, and then obviously we're introduced to Grace Haley Atwell's character. I mean, I've got to be honest with you, I have the hots for Haley Atwell.
Well, I think I don't think you're alone in this, to be honest. She has she's a very beautiful
she looks
lady.
Stunning in this, doesn't she? I mean, she really does look stunning, and she plays a great role.
And also she's I think a 40-year-old woman, which is a unique thing for Hollywood to have a 40-year-old leading lady now, because normally they're in their early to mid-20s. But it looks not bad against a 60-year-old Tom Cruise. Now, obviously, Tom Cruise doesn't look 60, but their age difference doesn't seem unnatural.
I mean, it's clear that Cruise is very self-aware about age appropriateness within kind of like relationships. I mean, listen, there aren't much of a relationship in there, but but it's a fun scene, and she's great. There's fantastic chemistry between them. Really kind of, I mean, rumor is that they dated for a while, but you can see this fantastic chemistry. But she oozes sex appeal and charm, and you kind of like, you can't take your eyes off her. I couldn't anyway. And and then obviously we're introduced to Shea Wiggum as well. Which is a bit, this one was a bit of an odd one for me. It almost felt like they need to introduce a character who's chasing after Cruise to kind of keep him on the go as a kind of a plot device. But you never it was a bit of a thing of, well, who's he working for? Which government department? I don't know.
And also, how does he always seem to know where Ethan is? Because later on, he turns up at the party with a White Widow. Well, only Grace knew they were going to be there, and then later on, he turns up on the train at the end. Yet they had to parachute to get there, so he just seems to be conveniently there.
I mean, I guess again, unless McHugh is going to explain it, is he secretly working for the entity? That could be a thing in there, and is he, or is he just working for Kitteridge? But I suspect there might be something that we're not being told there as well. And then we get to Morales, the main villain, who kind of almost is kind of very subtly kind of just walking through scenes in this kind of role and placing bags and things like that. Thought he was a pretty good villain.
Yeah, I do. But again, and maybe you're right. Maybe it'll be explained more in part 2. But why is he working for the entity? What does he want? Does he want money? Does he want why? Obviously, the entity needs a physical person
Yes.
to do
Yeah.
jobs, and we are told that he's been chosen, but we are not told what his own motivations for doing it are.
Yeah.
So, other than just say he's the baddie, we don't know why he's the baddie.
So again, I think that's one that we got to hand over the second part in. It's a case of are we going to find out that he's really got a family or a daughter or something like that? That ultimately he's doing all this for or something. What is that motivation behind that character? I think you're
but
right.
That needs to be fleshed out a little bit, because I came away going, okay, but why do you want? Why do you want this power? Why you make a speech about representing the power, but for what personal gain?
Yeah.
And when I was a kid, that I always remember the bit in Never-Ending Story where the wolf is the physical embodiment of the nothing, and he explains why he's doing it. And I always found that incredibly scary as a kid.
Yeah.
And I thought that that's what they needed. They needed the scare of the physical embodiment of the entity.
The entity, yes.
To explain what his motivation was. So I think McQuarrie maybe missed a little bit of a trick there, but it might be explained later on, so we won't dwell on it.
And I think there's probably going to be a lot of that as we kind of talk on about, it'll probably come. And I think, sometimes you've just got to go with a movie, haven't you? And you trust that, when it certainly is a two-parter, that is going to get wrapped up at some point. So we move then quickly on, like any good spy movie, we move to Rome, and which is then the car chase scene that we've.
Well, before we go that, what I've noticed is McQuarrie, and this isn't a criticism of McQuarrie so much as it's a criticism of all movie plot holes, which is we saw her. Tom Cruise leaves her at the gate, and she's getting on the plane, and yet both Tom Cruise and Shea William and the blonde girl who's called Paris arrive in Rome before Grace, even though they were all getting on the plane. And you go, but now, admittedly, we don't know how long the layover was. We don't know if she was in custody for a while. But we've gone from her getting on the plane to everybody arriving before her to set up things. So I did think again, all right, the pacing was awesome. So you don't need an explanation of everything.
Yeah.
But maybe just one or two lines. Maybe she could have, if I've been in custody now for 6 hours.
Yes, yeah.
Would have explained something. So, but again, a minor nitpick.
And so my favourite car chase out of the Mission movies, is not Fallout. Sorry, the one before it. It's and with Benji, and which leads into the motorbike chase. So what Rogue Nation. So what do you think of the car chase? I mean, I really enjoyed it, but I didn't think it was as good as. I
think firstly, a couple of things. One, I know this is an incredibly $300 million movie. They did some things which just are icing on the cake. Like they didn't just crash into a car. They crashed into several. They didn't just knock into a bike. They knocked over a fleet of bikes. Now, they didn't need to knock over a fleet, but because they've got the money to show 30 bikes, they crash over 30 bikes. So it's little things that I like, but...
I'll tell you what I did like as well, actually. When Grace got behind the car and basically just hit loads of stuff, but he's blaming everybody else, and I thought that was a nice little kind of. It's one of those things where it's a dig at women drivers, but it's not an overt dig at women drivers. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of quite funny. It was done in a funny way. I think the reason why I prefer the car chasing Rogue Nation is I just felt the pace of it was a little bit better. It was a little bit funny. I thought. I love the gimmick of the handcuffs thing. Don't get me wrong. Who's driving?
We'll talk about that in a minute. I'll talk about that in a minute.
But I actually thought I actually just thought the pacing and the originality of the Rogue Nation car chase was better. What were your thoughts on it?
Right. So what I thought was, to be honest, the whole scene, the whole car chase was a little bit long. It wasn't unexciting, but if it was trimmed a bit. Firstly, what I've noticed is the handcuff thing. is a gimmick I've seen in Tomorrow Never Dies, but that's done on a bike, which means it seems to be a little bit harder because you're holding on to somebody and riding a bike. And also, it's one of those, again, plot holes in franchises, in sequels, where they have a skill or a technology or a gadget or something in an earlier movie, yet they don't use it later on. And here in Mission Impossible 3, with a pen, he uncuffs himself.
Yes.
Yet he can't even uncuff himself
with a paper clip.
Yeah. And then they go get into it's a good little joke where he goes to he gets a spy car, and you assume it's the cool, sleek sports car. It's a little yellow. Yeah. And that got a couple of chuckles in the cinema I was in, and it is a good joke. But firstly, again, he looks on his phone it says spy, safe house, safe boat, safe car, which again shows there's obviously a load of teams out there setting this up, which means you can't be the IMF can't be the one guy, because it's not Benji or Luther that said, because he doesn't even know they're there. They come and rescue him at the end, and he's acts surprised, particularly when Ilsa was there. So there must be teams of people dropping these things off that show the IMF is part of a larger
and when you have a look at the kind of story arc of Ghost Protocol into Fallout, it is very, and actually even in the first one, which is actually about the knock list, you see that there's agents all over the world in every city and things like that, which it's a bit of a revisionist kind of thing that just doesn't work or serve the film. It was a little bit unnecessary. I mean, I thought the Fiat scene was cute, it was fun. They clearly had kind of fun shooting it, and I think the whole joke on the Aston Martin car being right next to it was over kind of little dig at Bond, but it's a fun scene, But I actually thought, I agree with you what you said the other night, actually, which is, even though it's very CGI heavy, I think the car chase in John Wick is better.
Yeah, well, because the other thing as well is that there was no real need for them to change cars, other than it seemed to me like there were a number of shots in this movie done for the trailer. And like he says, we've got to ditch this car, and then they find the new car, and then straight away the camera records them. So they weren't the changing of the cars didn't give them any breathing space.
Yes.
So what's the point in changing cars then?
Yeah.
And the other thing as well is, this was the second movie in the summer that featured a car chase in Rome, because they had the Fast and the Furious. X was a car chase in Rome, and they did the car chase in Rome. In FX is FX CGI heavy, and in that case a little bit better, because they didn't do anything in this movie that I hadn't seen before. Do you know what I mean? They didn't add anything new. And the big sort of where she burst through on the stairs was done better in Fast and the Furious. So it was a little bit of a car, but and the hero shot with the Colosseum behind him again was a copy and paste moment from Vin Diesel in front of the Colosseum.
Right.
And I'm going to have to say that Fast and the Furious did a little bit of a better job. Not a massively better job, but just a little bit. So again, I'm nitpicking.
Yeah, I mean, as you know, I'm not a fan of the Fast and Furious movies, so I haven't. I think the only one I watched, the fifth one in Rio, which I thought was really good, but after that they just got daft. I was like,
they are daft. Oh, they're absolutely daft. But that's the problem, is that they're so daft that the car chases are so over the top. You shouldn't have two car chases in Rome. You shouldn't compete against the Fast and the Furious, because that's going to out ridiculousness you.
So then we cock up the air miles some more, and we end up in Venice, which is essentially an exposition and motivation driver, isn't it? And so we have the I mean, I don't know where these nightclubs are that they're going to, but to be able to have conversations that they're having with all that pounding techno music in the background, I'd be like, what? I don't like that normally anyway. But ultimately, it all leads to the all the kind of parties kind of meeting, and then it leads to ultimately Ilsa's death in the fight on the bridge. And I mean, I think you and I knew from the trailers that it was very much signposted that she was going to die. You got, you knew it, didn't you? And you know, we were laughing, weren't we, about my argument with somebody on Reddit when I put on Reddit that it was clearly obvious that she's going to die, and I got shouted down by all these people saying that Cruise and McQuarrie wouldn't resort to such cheap plot devices. And at which point I highlighted to everybody about the book Plotto, where ultimately, it is the book of plot devices, and it's pretty much a common thing. You could see it all over.
You could do. The other thing as well is, with the exception of James Bond, you can't have an action movie hero having two girlfriends at the same time. His wife had to pass on her approval of Ilsa Faust in that previous one, and now Ilsa Faust has to die for him to get the new girl. And because there's obviously chemistry, and it's very between Grace, and she's obviously going to be the new love interest. So there has to be a exit and entrance.
And it's clear, that they kind of very, very heavily hint about Ilsa's a little bit jealous about what might have gone on between Cruise and the White Widow. And then there's the balcony thing where she says, I've never been in Venice before, and he says he's never been in Venice before. So it's clearly they consummated. Then and as we know, as soon as you consummate, you're done for. Again, it's just such a common movie trope, and it's bizarre that people railed against it. So and then ultimately we come to that just segues us into the big finale, which is basically all set on the Orient Express. I've got to be honest with you, the bike thing I enjoyed, and I think everybody's seen the how they did it and things like that. I enjoyed it. I liked some of the extra shots that we hadn't seen. The bit I enjoyed the most about that train scene was the typical carriages dangling off the edge, and they've got to get through. I thought that is the best example of that action scene I've ever seen. I thought it was brilliant.
And I want to talk about that, but I want to talk about another two other moments first of all.
Go for it.
Because the first thing is, we all know he's going to parachute off drive a bike off a cliff. They did the YouTube release thing of it. It's in the movie poster. We all know he's going to do it. So, and ultimately, it was only about 15 seconds, and it seemed very underwhelming to me. It was also one of those moments when we're waiting for it. We know it's going to happen. We're waiting for it, and maybe this should have been the opening stunt of the movie.
Yeah.
Because let's just get it out of the way, so we're not waiting for it. And also, the plot explanation as to why he has to do it was nonsense.
It was rubbish, wasn't it? It's interesting because I agree with you on the bike thing. It felt very much okay. Well, I've seen it now. Can we just get past it and get to the bits I haven't seen? I wondered whether what McQuarrie's approach to it should have been should he have done a little bit of a Jackie Chan approach to it? Which, remember, there's always those scenes in Jackie Chan, like Police Story and Project A, where you see him jump from the balcony onto the pole when he goes down, or he falls out the window and he falls down the thing, or he jumps onto the tree. But then it shows you it 3 times from multiple angles. And I did wonder at one point, I was like, McQuarrie's going to do a Jackie Chan on this, and we're going to see it, and we're going to see him jump off from multiple angles.
No, well, I thought what the reason for him to do it would be, I thought it would be. Have you seen Under Siege 2 with Seagal?
I have, but I mean, listen, that was I can't remember it.
Okay, that's fair enough. And
I know he's bad.
It's not even that good. But I thought he'd be. Steven Seagal is on the train at one point. He gets kicked off the train, and then he does the same thing. He gets in it's in a truck actually, and then he jumps onto the train again. I thought they'd have Tom Cruise on the train, then kicked off, and then that was the reason he had to kind of catch up, because the baddie girl Paris, she's on a bridge and she jumps on the train. So if she can do it and she's not a super spy, why does Tom Cruise need to? So that whole thing was weak to me. And the other thing as well, and I think McQuarrie missed a trick here, and I do think this was something that they could have done better, is why is it on a train? Now, it doesn't explain why it's on a train. It just says, this will happen to me. It will lay at my feet tomorrow at the Orient Express. That's the exposition scene in the thing. Now, knowing that it's on a train, I was thinking about the plot as to why they're going to have it on a train. And what I thought was, this would be because Tom Cruise would, the Ethan Hunt would manipulate it because it's an analog vehicle. The entity can't control it, and also with like the valleys, it could go into like a dead zone where the entity couldn't pick up on mobile phone signals. It couldn't predict what was happening. So I thought they'd have they'd say like we've got a 15-minute window where the entity cannot know and up to date and predict things that's going to happen. But they didn't. They just said, we're going to have it on a train. And all right, then we are. Do you know what I mean? But there was a trick there that was really missed. He could have said it on a train for a reason rather than just, I want to crash a train off a cliff, which is evidently what he has done.
Yeah, essentially. And that's, as we spoke about in our Mission Impossible 10 favourite scenes thing, the conversation was Tom Cruise, I want to drive a bike off a cliff. And McQuarrie was, I want to do a train. I mean, the train stunt is fine. I've seen it before. I mean, the train going over the bridge, it's fine. It's just a shot. It's but actually, the real greatness of that scene then is in them moving up through the carriages. I thought it was really well done. I mean, you could tell Hayley Atwell was really game because it really looked like her doing a lot of her own physical stuff. So. I thought she really I thought they worked really well together on that train, and as they moved up through the carriages, I thought it was a lot of fun. And it's clear it's clear that we're going to get Paris in the sequel. The whole she's got a pulse, was the big clue there, and and I do wonder whether we're going to see a little bit more of Wiggum's partner in the sequel as well. Is he going to be recruited into the Mission Impossible Force? Impossible Mission Force. So I think Kittredge. I mean, the thing about Kittredge, I was hoping that there would be some big link between Mission 1 and Mission 7. But there literally has been none, and as you believe it, it's basically been Kittredge has been working in the CIA for the last 30 years. I just felt that
he just seemed to come across.
Why did it need to be Kittredge?
Well, he just seemed to come across as Commissioner Gordon. Every now and again, when we've got a problem that the CIA can't do, we pick up the red telephone and we call Batman. Yeah, and it didn't need to be that, did it? No.
I thought it was weird why they brought Kittredge back. I could have understood it if they'd have linked it into Mission 1 in some way. I don't know. I mean, I get that. Kittredge had a little bit of fun with the White Widow about working with her mother and things like that. That was kind of nice, but it could have easily been somebody else written into it.
Yeah.
So,
and I always thought, particularly in the way it was filmed in the first one, the Dutch angle, I always thought Kittredge was a baddie, and I thought this would finally reveal him that for 30 years has been an anti-IMF guy.
And
actually quite the opposite.
Yeah, and I think that would have been a good kind of little plot device. That one of those kind of screenwriters kind of little games that they've played. If anybody knows about the Tommy Westfall universe, where basically every screenwriter is colluded in the fact of creating this fake universe that's in this boy's mind, and every American TV show is ultimately the creation of this boy's mind, and it's kind of nice that it would have been nice that if they'd have done something similar with Kittredge, where he's been in the background manipulating things or something like that, or. It just felt a bit weird why it was him. I was really hoping that they'd do something, they'd have some clever link into Mission 1, but no, it didn't happen. And then, Tom gets his final little parachute out and meets up with Benji, and we cut to credits.
Yeah, that was the other couple of. We've just skipped over a couple of other points. Again, and I spoke about this on our other discussion, there was an overuse of the mask. So the mask can convince. It didn't just change her face; it changed her body shape. I mean, and her bra size. I mean, how can you possibly mistake the body of Vanessa Kirby with the body of Hayley
Atwell? I think, and that's the kind of stretch of the imagination, isn't it? Of these films, and I know you have a real problem with the mask. I mean, listen, the masks are a problem. They are, aren't they? It almost feels like we've got to have some masks. in there, and and I thought it was dealt with quite nicely in Fallout, where Tom Cruise, and in fact, actually, it's one scene that we missed off our top. We didn't discuss in our top 10 list, was in the toilet scene where Tommy's going to impersonate this guy, but then Henry Cavill's character smashes the computer, and so therefore they can't use the mask, so he just has to wing it. And I thought that was a really good kind of thing where, oh, well, we got the mask, but let's not do it really. And again, I guess you could say the same thing with Philip Seymour Hoffman and Tom Cruise in the third one, which is in the opera scene where basically Tom Cruise impersonates Philip Seymour Hoffman. I mean, I know you don't like the mask, but I kind of just go with it. I just go with it. You suspend belief. But I mean, overall, listen, this is why I kind of think, it's not as good as Fallout, because I think it kind of went into a few weird areas and said a few different things that made you think, well, that's not happened before. Well, where's this come from? And and I think where Fallout didn't do that, Fallout felt like it was very forward facing, where this one feels like it's trying to create a new universe.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, I know what you mean.
So
a very, very, very soft reboot. It felt like.
Yeah. So it was weird, but I mean, overall, I mean, let's face it, I don't think we'll see much better summer movies for a while.
No. And I want to talk a little bit about the kind of the train thing, because I know I said I'd come back to it.
Yeah.
What I really liked was not about stopping the train and not about the train, the bomb. It was about making the way through each carriage, and each carriage had its own unique challenges. So the kitchen one was the fire and the oil. Then you've got the
cocktail bar. It was a cocktail bar, wasn't it? Yeah. And then you've got the dining cart with which was essentially the restaurant. Yeah, I thought that was really lovely, and it was clear they'd done it practically as well. Virtually all. I mean, obviously they'd have been on wires, but they really did do it practically. Whether it was in a studio or on the location, it doesn't matter. But it was clearly them dangling from it. I thought it was really well done. I really enjoyed it. It was one of those things where it was unexpected. I didn't expect it to be that good, and I think because I was a little bit underwhelmed with the mountain jump, it was like, okay, yeah, well, I've seen it so many times now. I'm kind of bored of it. That actually, when he comes in through the window and then that whole kind of train sequence, I thought was pretty good. Actually, I enjoyed it. So, I mean, listen, for me, it's an 8.5 out of 10 movie. It's I always kind of almost sometimes think there aren't any 10 out of 10s.
No, I agree with you.
Yeah, I would also class Fallout as a 9.5. I think this is just behind kind of Fallout, but I love Mission 1 so much. I think Mission 1's great, and I class Mission as an 8.5 sort of movie as well. But I'm biased because I'm a massive De Palma fan as well. So, what about your thoughts? I mean, where do you think it's at? I mean, if you were going to rank the Mission movies now 1 to 7, where are you ranking them?
Well, honestly, they with the arguable exception of number 2, they get better and they build on each one. I thought this was better than Fallout. I have some minor issues with Fallout, and I have some minor issues with this one. But generally speaking, this movie doesn't in any way feel like a 2-hour, 45-minute movie.
Yeah, absolutely not. Well, 2.5 hours, I think it was. Yeah.
Oh, maybe so.
Yeah,
but it's still
absolutely didn't feel like a 2.5. I mean, it whizzed by. Absolutely whizzed by. So you're basically saying, yes, this is the best Mission. Yeah.
I am. And what I like about it is it's the first sort of half is kind of spy airport-y, kind of running about the place, and I like that. And the second half, I would struggle to think of a better action sequence than that train climb at the end. Yeah. It's certainly the movie of the summer, and it's what you go to the cinema to watch. Is that climbing?
Commode, didn't he? Commode on his when Commode reviewed it, he said he thought it was one of the best action scenes done. He really rated it as well. I got to agree. I thought it was terrific. So there you have it. Rob rates it as the best Mission yet. I'm sitting it behind Fallout, but up there with Mission 1. and Ghost Rogue Nation. I keep calling it Ghost Protocol, Rogue Nation. So there we go. So tune in with us soon. Rob's gonna take us through some of these movie tropes and movie plot holes and various other things like that, and share his knowledge of movies and what frustrates him. And obviously we're going to be reviewing Oppenheimer soon, and we might do Barbie if I can wangle Rob getting to see Barbie. We might do Barbie together. So here's hoping. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Rob, do you want to say goodbye?
Goodbye. It's been fun. Talk to you soon.
All right, take care. Bye bye.